It's time for the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast.
We've got lots and lots of things to talk about and to do today. Covering the territories from the 1940s to the 1990s.
It's the best thing going today.
Interviewing wrestlers, referees, authors, and other media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great.
The cream, yeah. The cream of the crop.
And now, here's your host, Tony Richards.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. We call it Personalities, Territories, Towns, and Buildings because we cover all four of those particular things in our podcast every single week. And I have some fantastic guests. This week is no exception, because we're going to talk about some of the great personalities in pro wrestling. We're going to talk about some territories. We're going to talk about some towns. And we're going to talk about some buildings in Ontario, Canada. And my great friend and the wonderful wrestling historian, Wes Maidment, is going to be up first here today. He's my first guest. And he's going to talk to us about Ontario, which you probably remember had the great building of the Maple Leaf Gardens in the fantastic wrestling city of Toronto. And he's going to take us through 1975 in Toronto and Maple Leaf, but also some other promotions you may never have heard of before, including one that was run by the Wildman, also known as the Bearman. And he's got some great stories because he has followed and researched the career of this guy to the nth degree. Plus some other promotions I know you probably have never heard of before. So can't wait to share this with you. Let's get going on the show. First up, my friend Wes Maidment, and we're going right now to Toronto and Ontario, Canada. Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to another episode of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. I'm Tony Richards, and we're talking personalities, territories, towns, and buildings. And today I'm excited because for the first time, we're venturing outside the United States, and we're going into another country. And it just so happens to be our neighbors to the north, the great country of Canada. And I have one of Canada's great pro wrestling historians, Wes Maidment, here with me this evening, and we're going to be talking primarily about Ontario wrestling history, and we're going to be covering the year of 1975. So I'm so excited to talk through that. Wes, we've been friends now for a few weeks, and every time we get together, we have great conversations. So I know this will be no exception.
It's funny how this connection takes place with the internet. We're basically the same age. I'm baffled on how much this creates friendships, just like back in the days when people were trading tapes or trading fanzines or programs. I've made more friends in the last 2 years because of wrestling podcasts than I have in my whole life. It's great. And being here with you, and I like your specificness about being focused on a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said you were going back 50 years, right?
Right, exactly.
So it's nice that we can focus on a year. That kind of keeps it into a little bit of a structure, as opposed to, trying to talk about 1960 to 1980 kind of thing.
Yeah, and I like to talk about, like, go around and have the different guests about the different territories of what was going on that year in 75 and what's going on with the different personalities and the different towns. And we're going to talk about one of the most historic buildings in pro wrestling history tonight in Maple Leaf Gardens. And so I'm excited to get started. So where should we start in 1975 within the province of Ontario?
So just a little precursor for my American friends.
That would be me too. That would be me.
If Ontario was in the United States, it would be the fourth largest state. So then you're going to take into consideration a state like California or Texas. They had many, many different wrestling promotions and even territories in their own state. So like California had like LA, and they had San Fran, and then they also had at the top of California, they would have had Silverstone or what's his name? The
Oh,
guy who,
Don Owen. Don
yeah,
Owen.
Don Owens, yeah.
Yeah.
So in Ontario, uh, concentric to the bottom of Ontario, which is closest to the New York State, it was mostly centered around Toronto, which is the biggest city in the province, and we couldn't go anywhere without talking about basically the man who controlled wrestling in Ontario for 40, 50 years, Frank Tunney. He actually had his office in Maple Leaf Gardens, and he promoted in Maple Leaf Gardens from when the building was built, basically in 1931 until his passing. And that was him and Vince McMahon Sr. both passed around the same time, which was kind of weird. But yeah, Maple Leaf Gardens was a mecca of not just wrestling, but hockey, concerts. It was a multi-use building, gigantic, 17, 18,000 fans for wrestling if it was standing room only. And we're going to briefly talk about that in a bit, but I went to concerts there. I went to political rallies there. I saw the ice capades and circuses and anything else that was there. But when you go to a building that's got 17,000 people in it, and whether it's Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair or the Sheik or whoever, that that pop of that many people in the building, it just sends shivers down your spine. And I remember seeing the first time seeing Ric Flair, for example, come out and up the famous ramp. And I'm sure people could Google that if they wanted to. There's the famous ramp in Maple Leaf Gardens, and
Yeah.
Flair, for example, could do no wrong in Toronto, whether he was a bad guy or a good guy. He was loved, and
He,
seeing that. Sorry.
I was just going to say he had that effect everywhere. Like it was pretty amazing. Like he got over in both directions. It was amazing.
I really close to one of my favorite wrestlers. So, but back to 1975, Tunney had promoted in Toronto, and he didn't own a lot of the area. He sort of lent it out to his friends, and they were the agents, or they owned. Some of the times in places in Ontario, the people who were the managers of the local arenas in the small towns, they were the quote promoter of the area. So.
So
Seven,
did Tunney just primarily, was he the booking office then that booked the talent in for these local promoters?
funny thing is, Frank Tunney didn't book. He wasn't a wrestler. He wasn't he obviously he made his livelihood from wrestling, but he didn't do any of the booking.
Hmm.
He didn't do anything. He would just sort of had his territory, and he dealt little bits of it out to his friends. So
Who
um,
would have been the person who would have been booking the Maple Leaf
in
shows?
75 it would have been mostly the Sheik.
Oh, well, Sheik. Okay.
He would have been booking most of the matches. And I think some of the guys, say like Johnny Valentine, for example, would have been coming to Toronto still at that time. He would have, he was a big enough star. He would be able to say what was going on. And people like that would have been able to not book their own matches, but have their say on how to get over.
Tunney, and I've written about this before. I've got a question for you about him, though. He and Mushnick were so tight. Do you know much about the origins of their friendship? How it started or how they got to be such good friends? I mean, president and vice president of the National Wrestling Alliance and partners in St. Louis, and just a really close relationship. And it's funny that they both sort of started exiting the business around the same time.
Yeah.
You know much about how their friendship
Two
started?
two old school guys who started way back before like we can even think about remembering, or our parents even,
Hmm.
and they just hung together. I think a lot of the connection was because Kiniski and Watson were big for Tunney, and he booked them right across Canada throughout the 50s and 60s.
Hmm.
And of course, they were so big in St. Louis for much of it too. I think there was a closeness there. And Whipper owned points in St. Louis, as did Frank. I'm sure Kiniski did also. Um, and I think Tunney was also the treasurer for a while for the NWA.
He was.
But it's been said in different uh, books and things that Tunney was a bit of a peacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because he wasn't an ex-wrestler, that he could step away from that bravado that wrestlers have to have, and be able to be the common sense kind of guy.
I got you. All right.
So he doled out probably 30 areas and cities and little not hamlets, but little areas in Ontario that one person would run two or three arenas in the general vicinity. And you know, in Ontario, we had A towns and B towns. So the A towns would be running, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the B towns would be in the summertime they would be running like the cottage areas and the smaller towns just to let the fans out in the outskirts, say within 100 miles of Toronto, to for them to get to see some wrestling action. Um, in the past, Vern Gagne had wrestled in the city where I used to live when it was like 1,000 people, and Pat O'Connor had wrestled there. Kowalski wrestled there, so it's they were kept busy, so there was no need to go anywhere. They were wrestling every night if they chose to.
So, did Tunney own any other buildings besides Maple Leaf?
Yeah, that in 75 there was the Kitchener Arena, which was probably 7,500 seat state arena, London Arena, which was approximately the same. These are all within, like I said, these are all within less than 100 miles from Ontario, from Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And Niagara Falls. Um, Let me think here. Going east would be Oshawa, which was just outside of Toronto. Was a longtime promoter there, Pat Milosh, who was basically in 1975. He was sort of done. He had given up his best years already, and we'll talk about the Wildman a little bit. He had sort of taken over his territory. Um, so that it was a change was coming, and it was odd because 74 was a really good year in wrestling in Ontario. Everybody probably made money. Every arena was sold out, unless it was perfect weather in the summertime. And that's, a downfall for people don't want to go sit in an arena unless you're a diehard fan. Um, if it's beautiful outside and you're in your swimming pool drinking beers. Like, like,
You bet.
but Maple Leaf Gardens was the main site, and in 75 they started switching to every second week. And the Sheik was the main heel, the main booker, the main event every 2 weeks, and it was a rotating cycle of baby faces there: Kowalski, Stasiak, Parisi, Billy Red Lions, and Lord Athol Leighton was still wrestling in, and many of the guys were tied to Detroit. So yeah, big time wrestling was still part of the focus in Ontario. Most of the guys were coming down from Detroit. Was on Saturday night, and Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens was always on Sunday night. The attendances in 75 were still pretty good. I still think they were pulling around 10,000 people. And I've worked this math a couple times thinking about how much money the Sheik made in his time in Toronto. And yeah, he had a 126 match run of being unbeaten in Toronto. And that's, I know he was the booker. I know he was the main star. I know he was huge, but that's just crazy to think of being unbeaten that long. But if you have 10,000 people every second week at even $4 a ticket back in 1975 or five, that over a year is a one massive pile of money. And I think Sheik was making 6% at the time of the gate.
Wow.
And he might have even been making more because he was booker.
Just in perspective, what year would the Sheik's run start, and when would it finally play out over that 126 match?
He wrestled a few times in the early mid 60s, and when Whipper started getting older and they hadn't groomed anybody to bring in yet to take over, kind of like from Whipper being the main baby face. And the Sheik came in 1969, and it exploded. It just exploded. That was about the time I became a fan, 1969, I think, around there. And it was just crazy to think about how a person could rule the roost for so long, and it was just week after week. So 69 to 77. So yeah, 8 years.
Wow.
Two matches he lost, I think, and there was obviously lots of double countouts and disqualifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever they could dream up for this week. But
Right.
two losses only to Brazil and to Thunderbolt Patterson. But he
Yeah.
gained the belt back in the next card.
Yeah, and for those of you that are just trying to do the math, I mean, we're talking about 26 shows and just 75 alone, right?
Yeah.
Twice a month, every month.
Every month. And it did, looking back now, Tony, when we look back, and some things just don't make any sense, because we're all smart now, right?
Right, right,
But,
right.
but at the time, people were dying to see the Sheik get the, what, kicked out of him. And they would bring in baby faces. They would bring in heels. I mean, one of the favorite matches was Stasiak against the Sheik, Stan Stasiak. And of course, one of the finishes would be Stasiak hits the Sheik with the hard punch, but the Sheik's outside of the ropes and Stasiak's inside of the ropes, and it's a count out,
Mm,
or reversed,
right.
whereas Sheik would be inside, get the hard punch, fall down, basically dying, but Stan gets counted out because he's outside of the ring for past 10. Um, a great ring in Toronto, huge, gigantic ring, and the ramp was so exciting to see the people come up the baby faces jogging up the 4 or 5 steps and running down the ramp and touching people's hands like rock stars, right? And the heels coming into the ring. Really explosive, exciting place to see wrestling.
I just always because I don't know, it's just the way that it's connected in my head. When I think about Maple Leaf Gardens, I think about two other places. I think about St. Louis and I think about Houston. And almost every wrestler I've ever talked to that worked in St. Louis, since you brought up the ring, they talked about how hard it was. Like it was, they used old boxing rings at Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis. Do you know much about how the ring was structured, and was it a hard ring, a soft ring? Did it have a lot of bounce to it? What did it sound like when you were there as a fan? That kind of stuff.
I so I remember once it was um it was Andre against one of his foes in the 80s, and that Andre had body slammed. Just say it was Khan. I don't know. I can't remember who it was. And he body slammed him, and the referee went like this from
Oh,
the reverberations. It
right.
was it was I think I would guess it was a 20 by 20 ring, and I have no idea if it was hard or not. But I know that ring basically stayed in the Maple Leaf Gardens, and they got put away. It wasn't like the ring that they threw in the truck and took somewhere else.
Yeah, larger
The
ring.
a lot of the arenas in Ontario had their own rings because the wrestling had been there for so long over the years.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's
you brought up Andre, and you and I were talking the other day, just visiting, and is that kind of when the Sheik streak kind of jumped the shark? When he had the Andre match in Maple Leaf in '74, was that the beginning of the Sheik's believability starting to go the other direction?
it's so sad because the Sheik was so hot and so powerful and so um exciting in his own way, but he was, when you're coming into the ring in 1975, for example, his hair was starting to go gray. I mean, he was never muscular or anything, but He was still a wrestler, but I mean, he was no physical thing. Everyone could see he was getting older.
Hmm.
And Andre, and everyone could watch, just Google YouTube, Google Andre the Sheik, the Fire, Maple Leaf Gardens, or whatever you want. And it was the Andre in 74 or 73, 75. It was just, he was fantastic. I
Yeah.
mean, he could do so many things that he just couldn't do when most fans remember him in the WWF, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
he was new. I mean, not a lot of people had seen him, and that
uh,
was when we started to see film clips, right, of him, just short film clips to promote that he'd been in your area or he was coming to your area, and he was just so much different than anything you'd seen before as a fan. And he could move,
the
and he had a lot of mobility, like you said. You know, I
he did,
remember him
and
coming to I remember him coming to the Tennessee territory in '74, and just I was just 11 at the time, and I just was staring at the television screen in disbelief at this monster of a human being that was going to be live in our area. Just amazing.
it was, we had seen him in Ontario on TV for years because he had started out in Montreal with Grand Prix, and we had Grand Prix TV in Toronto. So we were used to uh, Jean Ferret and Andre the Giant. So, and by 75, he had appeared in Toronto at Maple Leaf Gardens probably 10 times, I guess, something like that. I mean, he usually came in for the big Christmas show or around Christmas time, and always in the summertime for and we'll get to this a little bit later, but he would always come in for Detroit, Toronto, Montreal tour, and he would work for the Wildman also in Ontario, visiting unbelievably small towns. But we'll get to that after. But yeah, Andre was, I think, and everywhere I've ever read has said that that was the beginning of the end, that there's no believability
Hmm.
anymore,
Right.
because you can only use cheap, I'll use the word dusty finishes
Hmm.
so often. And if you're using them every match, every 2 weeks, people are just going to stop coming. They just can't take it anymore.
Right.
You know how frustrating it was in that NWA highlights in the late 70s, 80s, when it was, you the heel leaves the ring with the championship belt, and it's like on TV 2 weeks later. It's like, well, he didn't win, and it was such BS for a
Right.
finish. Cheap, really, really cheap.
Yeah. We saw Sheik in Tennessee, and it came in, it took on Jackie Fargo, and they had the basic 6, 7 minute brawl match, and Fargo bled, and Sheik threw fire, and that was the end. But there was nothing else on the card like it. Like all the undercard, nobody else did anything like that. There was no brawling outside the ring. There was no cheap tactics or anything like that. So, and we didn't see the Sheik every week, so it wasn't that big a deal. But when you saw him in Detroit and you saw him in Toronto and you saw him month after month and week after week, I could see where it would, and then to go against somebody like Andre, where you're like, there's no way, this has to be the end. This is, the Sheik is going down this time, and then he doesn't.
Mhm.
It's kind of like, okay, so I can't invest in this anymore.
And they push that every time. Oh, like Haystacks Calhoun was coming in, or Tony Parisi, or the whoever was coming in, and he just, there's no way that he cannot do. And it got tired. It got like really tired. And I'm a clippings guy,
You're right.
so I look back through my clippings and I remember this time frame, and I go, oh my God, like this is so brutally pathetic. Like, oh my gosh. But we bought into it as, in 1975, I was 16, so
Of
I was
course.
still a believer, not a
Right.
believer, but a believer. I still like the sport, and as much as I do now.
Well, we have a little bit of it an advantage with our age of living in that time frame, that, and I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day, is to properly evaluate wrestling history, you have to do it in its context. you have to suspend everything from today backward to that point and evaluate it from from back and forward, not from forward backward. And so many
Mhm.
people have a hard time doing that, right? I heard somebody the other day talk about how somebody was like somebody, and they were talking about the person in the 70s was like the person in the 90s. I'm like, no, it's the other way around. The person in the 90s was like the person in
Yeah,
the 70s.
that's right.
So, okay, so what were the big matches in 75 at Maple Leaf?
There was, well, every 2 weeks was a match, and most of the guys had a 2 or 3 card run. So double count out, um, hit the ref accidentally by mistake in the next match, and then the Sheik always won the third, or the, what do they call it, the get out of town match or whatever it is,
Right,
right?
right.
Um, and I, talking about putting things into perspective, I have 5 wrestling history Facebook group pages, and a lot of people comment on some of the posters and posts that I do on saying, "Oh, that Sheik match was only 4 minutes long." Okay, I get it. Maybe the match was only 4 minutes long. It was 15 minutes before the match started because of his antics, and sometimes it was 15 minutes after the fact of the Sheik getting absolutely pummeled by someone, even though the decision's already been made. It's an after the end of the match fracas that's going on.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you look just at a piece of paper that says the Sheik won in 4 minutes, well, what do you think? Like that's a squash.
Yeah.
It's a nothing. What do you do? A couple drop kicks, a hip toss, threw him in the corner, a couple punches, and pinned him, kind of thing. But no, it's not how it was.
Right.
There was a whole procedure of how he sucked everybody in with his antics, and um,
Yeah, and
well,
I think that's lost on people at times when they only look at the match.
mhm,
uh, Great performers are just that. I mean, they're able to perform for the audience, and there's so much more to it besides just what goes on bell to bell.
yeah,
Right, right. That's what you're saying is like the whole spectacle might have been half an hour, but bell to bell was 4.5 minutes,
yeah.
which was not the primary focus of his performance. Right.
Exactly. Like, and if you want to go back to like Gorgeous George, for example, whatever videos you've seen of him, that was like, how long did it take him to get, how much long did it take them to hook up? How long? Every match, like every main event, right? But like, my gosh, by the time the music started, Pomp and Circumstances, and he started strutting to the ring, it was probably 10 minutes, before, even more than 10 minutes before they hooked up, and the crowd's going berserk. So there is showmanship of a great talent.
And I think one of the things that I love about this particular time period is I think you always love the time period that you grew up with more than any other time period.
Yeah.
But besides that, I think the bookers and matchmakers of this time period put more variety in the total card. There was different things for different parts of the audience. Like you might have the Sheik in a main event that was more spectacle and more performance, but right underneath it, you might have a classic wrestling match that lasted an hour draw or a 45-minute draw or a half-hour draw. You might have a outstanding wrestling tag team match with two tag teams that could really wrestle, or you might have the small guys, forgive me for the term of the time, but the midgets might have it, or you might have the women, or you might have a mixed tag team match with midgets and women, or women and men, or I mean, they just mixed it up a lot more throughout the entire card rather than just saying, oh, it was just a 4.5 minute match.
And you made a good point of saying, when you were talking about Fargo and the Sheik, if everybody on the card finished the match with a drop kick and a pin, it would be nothing special.
Right.
So, when I haven't been to, I don't go to that matches very often anymore. I want to, but it just, things happen, right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
You can't book a night of independent wrestling and have two finishes or three finishes that are exactly the same. Like
Or
don't even
have
get me started about this.
or have two or three matches where guys get hit in the head with a chair, or a couple of
Yeah,
guys that get slammed through tables, or I mean, it's like all of it's like that. You can't do
yes,
that and expect the audience to react in a way that you want them to, right? That's what you're.
our age group, anyways.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Well, I think human beings are. I mean, I have a basic problem with people who say that the business has changed. And I understand what they're saying, but actually, human beings and the psychology behind human beings is the same as it's always been. But what
it's,
we've done is we've gotten away from the way that it was presented to that psychology, right? And that's the way I see it anyway.
so doing research, you see you read something in the paper about two guys from the 40s who went 45 minutes with one fall. And you're trying to imagine what's going on. And these guys weren't jumping off the tops of buildings or anything. They were just wrestling.
Right.
And maybe someone got thrown out of the ring once or twice, but that was it. And the mindset of the new breed, and I'm gonna take anything away from them, athletic, exciting, doing their own thing. It's not what we grew up with, and
Right.
it isn't what we, like you said, it wasn't what we grew up with and what is our favorite
Well,
time period. Just
and
like
I
music, it's the same thing. Our favorite
exactly.
music is usually when we hit our early teens. So um, it's hard to explain to people, and I sometimes I try when someone asks the question, well, what do you mean about it's a 5 minute match? Well, explain to them briefly that it wasn't just it wasn't two guys that came in the ring, they wrestled for 5 minutes and they left.
Right.
So it was a spectacle, it was a performance, and it's we could talk about the past and now for forever and a
Of
day,
course.
Tony. Really
Right.
could. Um, it is what it is. But on the same note, we're here on a time tunnel talking about 75.
That's it.
So, one more thing I'm going to say about Maple Leaf Gardens at this time, they had dropped down to probably about 8 matches. Whereas at one time in the early 70s, they used to have sometimes 15, 16 matches and 20, 25, 26, 30 wrestlers on the card. And people look at that and they think, well, how could that be? But it was a big building. Everybody got paid fairly. It wasn't like no one was going there and wrestling for free. And they were trying to bring up the young guys and, still keeping their quality guys around and keeping them happy in the semi-main events or whatever. But as you said, there was women's wrestling wasn't allowed in Ontario until I think 1972. But after that, we had the ladies quite often,
Hmm.
um, and there was a huge population of little wrestlers. I don't even like saying that. You know, I got into arguments about that too. It's what they were called. They were called
It's
midget wrestlers. Sorry, they were called midgets.
right.
Um, and
Again, everything in its historical context. At the time,
yes,
that was the name, right?
yeah,
That was the way you were described, and they were perfectly fine with it.
they were the guys that trained. They were no different from the big guys. They wrestled. They got trained. They learned what to do. It was a little more comical, but on the same note, it was a draw. It was a draw for maybe dad to bring some neighborhood kids to watch the wrestling to see the midget wrestlers or something, right?
Yeah.
Um, moving from Maple Leaf Gardens, which was a mecca, and it was the biggest place. Any promoter would have loved to have been able to have that, and no promoter ever got in ever without Tunney's blessing. So
Yeah.
um, we're going to run a little east of Ontario to the far east, which borders on Quebec, and talk about Larry Kazaboski. who was a longtime promoter from the 40s right to the 70s, right around this time, 1975, 76. He was a little older and he was getting ready to shut down. His Northlands promotion ran from Ottawa, which is the capital city of Canada, and the eastern part of the province, all the way up to the North Country. And he promoted, he basically had all the cities and towns that were over 200 miles away, 250 miles away from Toronto. And with Frank's blessing, obviously, right? Um, I think it was 1944 or 45, he started promoting, and he had an older brother, Alex Kazaboski, who died in the ring. But Larry was more of a homesteader, and he did tour in the 60s. I think in the winter because the hockey arenas in Canada were all full with hockey. So he'd head down south, like many Canadian wrestlers would do, into the Louisiana or Mississippi kind of things.
Yeah.
And Kazaboski had a great thing going. He had a few core guys that lived in the area, and he'd bring in some not the biggest stars, but some of the people who started with him were Nikolai Volkov started there. Um, Gito Mongol sort of started there. Ronnie Garvin and Terry Garvin both started there. So he had a few guys who down south there was one team. I saw a picture of them, the Mass Medics.
Yeah.
Talked about in their tag team posts, and there was one Quebec wrestler who wrestled a lot for Kazaboski, Don Lortie, he ended up being one of the Mass Medics down south. So
Gotcha.
it was a grooming territory. Lots of guys from Ontario that I know started there and loved him. It was a summer territory, more of a end of winter, spring, summer, to the middle of September, basically, territory. And they worked every night too. So again, we're talking about a big area, a big province
Sure.
or state. So there's
Did
lots.
did Larry Kazaboski, did he have an affiliation with a federation, or was he an independent, or
He was basically independent, but closer to the end, he started running in conjunction with the Quebec promotions, Grand Prix, which was the Vachons,
right?
and the Rougeaus, which was All Star Wrestling. Raymond Rougeau, I think, had some of his first matches there.
Great. Awesome.
So he was a couple of it's a really good book, and it was called The Wrestler from Renfrew. That was the home city where he lived in Ontario, and really good, nice book, quite in depth about his career and his time and how he ended up getting out of the business because his way of promoting had kind of dried up. He
Yeah.
drove the ring truck, his son sold the tickets, kind of thing, and the boys all put the ring together and tore it down, and it, kind of like a homey kind of home-based business.
Yeah,
Uh,
if he would have been somewhere in the States and not in such a large land territory, he probably would have been part of a territory, because most of the territories in the States had that guy that was the local guy who took care of the ring truck and ran the concessions, and they ran their particular town. Even though the booking office booked the talent, the every town had a guy like Larry, that sort of was that was their entrepreneurial business, was doing wrestling in that town. And
yeah,
and that was good for the booking office to have that person, because that's how they got the town up and going.
that's
um,
right.
you
That
know
they would have never succeeded in somewhere that was 300 miles away from their home base if they didn't have a guy who was, quote,
right,
uh,
they wouldn't, it wouldn't have been it's a little hard for modern fans to maybe get this, but just to run your television show in that market wasn't enough. You needed somebody to work with the local organizations and do fundraisers, and to set up ticket outlets and do those kind of manage work with whoever had the building. All of those things were really vital to getting a town going back in this particular time period. It wasn't enough just to have the television show.
It's 1,000% correct, Tony. And when we move on to our next subject here, we're going to blow that right out of the water. So
I'm very interested in this part of our program because I just started going through probably about a year ago. I started going through WWF results in the 70s, and I came across this guy, and I'm like, who is this guy? Like, who is the Canadian Wildman? And then I meet you and I get your Facebook group and I see your t-shirt and I'm like, this guy was something else. Like, so I'm excited about this. Tell us about the Wild Man.
well, uh, first off, I started collecting his clippings in the 80s. And I knew about his promotion, but was never had never been to any of his shows. And I'm going to tell you right now, I told you this when we were talking the other day.
Yeah.
I was a closet fan. So as a little kid and a youth, I had everyone that I hung with, everyone loved wrestling. And then as I got older, nobody liked wrestling. No one, absolutely no one. And I had no one to go with. And I chose to live a more of a carefree lifestyle at that
Sure.
time
We all
with
did.
with my money. So I was a closet fan, but I watched TV religiously as much as I could, and I started collecting his clippings. It was they were different. They're just so different, and your producer's going to post some of them up, so that's
Great.
going to be
Yeah.
really interesting because his posters are so iconic that they're just completely sought after so much. They're going for hundreds of dollars now, whereas a year or so ago, 2 years ago, you could still get them for $50 at an antique mall or something like that.
Well, you've done
Um,
such a great job promoting them that you've pushed the price of the market up. So that's great.
I have, and I've bought posters, personally found them and sold them to people who I thought wanted them more than I did, which
Yeah.
is, I would love to have more posters in my collection, but if someone wants it more, then I gladly gave it to them, sold it to them. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So what
Um,
was it about? What was it about him?
he 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 was a one-man show. Um, he had some great stars wrestle for him in the past. He promoted from about 1966 right up until his death in 1988, when he died in a car accident in Newfoundland with Pat Kelly and Adrian Adonis. And he had a ridiculously tough life, just incredibly tough. And he persevered as a one-man show. They say that he promoted shows even though he knew he wasn't necessarily going to make any money, kept the boys happy, influx some money in the areas that he promoted. And there wasn't very many places in Ontario, and it's a big province, that he didn't promote. He promoted in baseball parks, arenas, um, fairs. He just did it all in those years with newspaper ads and posters, no TV.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sort of working right now on a documentary on his life. We've been working on it for a few years,
How cool.
and we hope we can find a producer for it. So we interviewed so many people that were in his promotion, and everyone said the same thing that he was a great guy, a great payoff man. Andre loved working for him because they got along. They
Yeah.
just got along, and it wasn't a matter of pay with Andre. It was a matter of friendship.
So what was the Wild Man's weekly loop like? What towns did he run and what was that schedule like for people that
He
worked
he,
for him?
he crisscrossed the province. The boys all talk about sometimes it was a 300-mile run from town to town.
Oh
So they
wow.
just drove all night, drinking beer, throwing the beers out the window, and setting up the next day when they got to the ring, tying one of his wrestling bears up to a tree somewhere outside of the arena,
Oh wow.
and the bear destroyed some cars or some park or something, and it. he was a wild man, definitely a wild man. So he 1975, he had just come off a really good year in 74 where the Mongolian stomper
Hmm.
had come out to Ontario from Calgary, and he wrestled from May to September. They wrestled every night, and Dave made a lot of money, a ton of money that summer. 75, he had Andre work for him in 75. The Sheik was working regularly for him now, even though he was still working for Tunney.
Oh, wow.
Many
So,
of them,
and besides his Detroit stuff too, right? So he's
yeah,
working for him.
yeah,
Yeah. The Sheik was on the road a lot in 75. That's
a
pretty
ton.
amazing.
It's crazy to think about how much mileage that the Sheik would have done in his life.
Yeah.
Dave had most of the local guys that some people would know, like Billy Red Lions. He had Stan Stasiak, Tony Parisi. He 75, he would have had Chris Cole that year still. Some of the guys from Detroit, Rip Hawk, Hansen, um, Lewin wrestled for him, Mark Lewin, King Curtis, Furpo, Abdullah the Butcher. The list just goes on and on. Kevin Sullivan wrestled for him.
Yeah. King Curtis is over in Calgary in 75. Would he have just gone over and worked for Wildman too? Just,
Yeah,
just a
King
couple of weeks
Curtis,
at a time or,
they had brought because in Toronto, and we'll get to this a little later, but
yeah.
in Toronto we had a great array of TV shows. So they brought Lewin and Curtis into Toronto in the summer of I think 75, and he did maybe a mini tour with Dave on the in between the two dates for Frank Tunney at the Maple Leaf Gardens.
Oh, wow.
So that was one of the things that Tunney didn't mind. He didn't mind his guys working for Dave. Dave and Frank got along pretty well. It was said that at one time Frank lent we're talking about Dave McKigney
Yep.
slash Gene Dubois slash the Wild Man, the Bearman. He Tunney had lent him his insurance rider to do shows, and at a cost probably, of course, but and it eventually insurance put the wild man out of business because it ended up costing too much. But
But I've seen Dave as the wild man on a lot of Maple Leaf shows.
yeah, he during the Tunney years, the Frank Tunney years, he would be there and he would bring the bear in sometimes. One of his star bears was Terrible Ted, and they had traveled in, I think I counted 32 states they wrestled in.
Now, didn't he try to have some television in 75? Like, I think I saw one or two shows where Angelo and Lanny Poffo are on there as the NWA World Tag Champions. And I think that
Exactly.
was a Dave McKigney show, wasn't it?
It was his only try at TV. They taped it in one of his big towns, which was London, Ontario, which was about 100 kilometers west of Toronto, going down towards Detroit. And it was a fantastic tape, a fantastic show.
And
It was,
I love him for that because we don't have a lot of tape of Angelo and Lanny at that time.
Mhm.
A lot of people from Kentucky, like me, are in love with them because they did the ICW promotion.
Yeah,
After that, in the late 70s, early 80s, we all loved that promotion because we thought it was ours because it was based in Kentucky.
yeah,
And they had been in Kentucky earlier in 73, 74, working for Phil Golden. And then they went to work with Sheik in Detroit and went to work in Maple Leaf and here at this McKigney show. And I'm like, man, I'm glad he did that show because we have that tape now, all these years later, of them doing their heel act, which they were, well, Angelo was a heel, but Lanny was always a babyface in Kentucky and ICW. And so it's interesting to see that time capsule of him doing his gymnastics and being a heel, which his gymnastics was making me mad as a fan. So it was working as far as being a heel. But I just
yes.
love Dave for having made that tape for us that all these years later.
I tried finding out what happened, why it never succeeded, why it never went on, and most of the people that I would have been able to get a quote from, or they're gone. And in my research from that is just, I just stopped because I kept asking people. I asked a lot of the Detroit people, what happened? Do you know what happened? And no one knows what happened, whether it was the Sheik was holding him up, because the Sheik's his mobile TV studio truck had come to London to tape the show. That's how it got taped. And um, so we don't know if the Sheik held him up for money or no idea.
Hmm.
But it's sad because at the time he could have partnered probably with the Sheik and went against Tunney um, for smaller stations around the Toronto area, and they probably could have been more successful than he was. But Dave, 75, Dave was still making tons of money,
Yeah.
working probably, I'd say, 150 to 175 shows a year in Ontario. He was nonstop. He was either wrestling or he was promoting, and that was his gig.
The Sheik did not have a nice track record of partnerships. So I can imagine it probably was something along those lines.
Yeah. The word I heard, and I was talking to Brian Solomon
Mhm.
and to Dave Brzezinski, that he, not that Brian Solomon ever met him, but he did that fantastic book,
Yeah.
um, Blood and Fire, that when you were on the ends, you were his best friend, and when you're on the outs, you were faceless, totally nothing. And he had the power to do that, which is um, kind of weird because we all know what happened to him. He
Yeah.
just wouldn't change. He wouldn't let go. He wouldn't bring any new people up, and his promotion went
And
right,
p-
just
pretty
down the toilet.
pretty much alone at the end of his life,
Yeah.
which happens to a lot of guys like that who do not play well with others and do not develop good relationships. And so, he I covered this in the on the Briscoe and Bradshaw show on the Jim Barnett shows we did. Jim Barnett tried to do what right by him when they went into Ohio and West Virginia, and Sheik's girlfriend made off with the box office one night, and
Yeah.
never sent the money back. So Barnett just said, "Okay, no more partnership with the Sheik. We'll just run it," And so you do those kinds of things over time to enough people, you end up with nobody. So
And when you burn your bridges, you end up with nobody. And
right.
Dave was gruff and probably a little bit of a recluse if it came to fans. But all the wrestlers I talked to, I'd say 40, maybe 50 even wrestlers that worked for him said he was a great guy, a great payoff man, always gave what he promised, even if it was to his loss.
All
And
right.
and it would be sad to not say that some of the tragic things that happened in his life, one of his bears killed his live-in girlfriend, and
Oh no.
to think about that happening in the context of the real world as opposed to um I was lucky enough to go to the house and stand in the room where it happened, and it was just completely surreal. But it was very exciting also to know that Andre the Giant had slept there on the couch, probably in the living room, and
Yeah.
the bear pen was still there that you could see. So it was pretty interesting to see.
Oh my.
I I love his little guy fighting against the world promotion and what he stood for and what he did. That's why I pour so much energy into his promotion. My page for him is coming up to 9 years old now, and I learn something new just about every week.
So let's take just a minute because I just know we've got people listening and watching the show who are they're just yelling at me right now to ask you. Can you just briefly tell the story of what happened with the girlfriend and the bear?
Well, they um he was talking on the phone to Tony Parisi. And phone, there was a big show coming up. We always had a big show in Toronto on our Canada Day, which was July 1st. And they had a plan to do the show, and Dave was going to bring one of his wrestling bears. Terrible Ted was just about retired, and he had Smokey the Bear, who was turning into a really great wrestling bear. Um, Dave was cleaning one of the bear pens. Lynn, his living girlfriend, had answered the phone and passed it through an open window. Dave turned around and said, "Lynn, get out of the house. The bear's in the house." And most people think that it was a problem with maybe a menstrual cycle or something like that. And the bear just squeezed the life out of her. Dave hit the bear over the head with a couch. He was charged at the time I don't think he was charged with murder. I think he might have been charged with accessory to manslaughter or something like that. It was in the newspapers everywhere here, and it was brutal.
How terrible.
Because we're so used to the unreal portion of wrestling,
right?
That we see people bleeding or they're hurt or whatever, and then you see them outside the arena, they're walking to their car, they're fine. And this was reality, right? It's so sad. And the lady's daughter is on she's on one of my groups, and we've talked at length about it, and I wouldn't say she's still traumatized, but pretty darn close.
Of course, that's understandable. Okay, so tell us about the UWA.
Okay, this is really exciting because they came into Ontario in late '74, December, and they started out in Ohio. And I don't know if you've ever talked with Terry Sullivan. Terry Sullivan out of Detroit. He had something to do with it, and I talked with him about it before, and he doesn't like talking about it because he lost some money and was treated fairly by the owners. But Universal Wrestling Association, sometimes known as what was another name they went? I can't remember the other name they went by, but it was out of Ohio, and it was a splinter group from the Sheik's promotion, Big Time Wrestling in Detroit. And the Jack Kane, who was the booker for the Sheik, left and started this promotion up with mostly Killer Tim Brooks and Tony Marino. And they were main eventing everywhere. They had some big shows. They ran the Toledo Sports Palace and lots of places in Ohio and Michigan and Indiana. But they came into Ontario with a bang, and it was a new zip on life, if you want to call it that, because of everyone here was used to the Sheik and his TV matches, and this was just like a new breed of wrestling that came in with new people that we hadn't seen that much. Sailor White was one of the big draws. Kurt Von Hess was there, and they ran some smaller arenas, but they ran every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks for months and months and months, and it was a big deal to have another promotion in town. In Toronto. So everyone was really excited about it. They had half decent crowds. And by the summertime, their promotion had dried up and blown away.
Oh, wow.
Although I was just talking with Kurt Von Hess's daughter the other day, Paige Von Hess, or that's not her name, but and we were talking
Sutherland, I think might be her name.
Sutherland, yes. Yeah. We were talking about a chap named Fred Major. I don't know if you've ever heard the name. He was associated with wrestling in South Africa, and around this time he was pals with Don Leo Jonathan, and we think that they may have been running some of these shows because Jonathan was still a big star in BC, British Columbia, and in the West Coast, and for him to come down to Ontario for single shots would have been crazy. So we think that him and Fred Major were sort of the remnants after the fact when UWA was dying out, and Jonathan hit some of the bigger towns that UWA was hitting, but it didn't last long. And by June '75, that's the last listings I have for matches for them. Still exciting, interesting, and it's always nice when different promotions on TV,
Right.
whether you only get to see the TV or not, but it's always nice. And people who didn't have two different TV shows on their TV growing up, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but we were so blessed in Ontario. Oh my gosh, we'll leave that for now.
Yeah. All right. So Tony Parisi, you have him down here as somebody you want to talk about.
Yeah, Tony was a big star in not just in Ontario, but he was Bruno Sammartino's cousin in the '60s as Puglisi, and he was from Niagara Falls, Ontario, which borders on, of course, Niagara Falls, New York. And he was very famous there. He had a restaurant and a hotel, and he got a promoter's license, which was tough to get in Ontario also because uh, Tunney ruled the athletic commission in Ontario, and the people that Tunney liked got licenses, and the people Tunney didn't like didn't get wrestling licenses. So Tony had a license, and we've got some promotion for him in 1975 throughout the summer and spring in Niagara Falls, and he had basically the same stars that were working for Frank. It was just another payday for the guys, kind of thing. And they were running actually on the off Sundays from the Maple Leaf Garden shows. So, and their ads were different. I never got to a show, unfortunately, but their ads were different, and they never had TV either. But everyone knew those stars because of Tunney's TV.
Yeah. And then George Crybaby Cannon.
Oh man, I will never take anything away from George Cannon for trying. He just kept on going, kept on going. But his TV shows were, in my estimation, poor. The only reason I watched them was because I just wanted to see wrestling. But the Louis Martinez and some of the guys were getting a little over the hill, and there was some younger guys, but it was just another TV show on TV, and Cannon morphed from Windsor, Ontario, which is the far west of Ontario, and he taped in Windsor, taped in Toronto, moved further east, and ended up taping in Montreal, Canada, in Montreal, Quebec, and he probably promoted on TV. He had TV for years and years in Ontario and in Canada because he had a deal right across Canada. And like I say, his shows were, excuse me, his shows I thought were lame or tame or whatever, but
yeah,
it was still wrestling.
And he was connected with the Sheik in some ways, right? I mean,
he was connected because he was from Windsor, which was across the river from Detroit, and they had known each other. And George MacArthur, who was George Cannon, had worked started out in basically in the Michigan territory, anyways.
Yeah, yeah. And he had a crybaby act, everybody.
He was I liked him as a manager and in the ring, but as a host of a TV show, he was subdued.
We saw him in the early '70s in the Tennessee territory. He managed the Fabulous Kangaroos, the Don Kent and Don Kent, Al Costello version of the Kangaroos, and
Yeah.
he was, he was somebody that you could not like, as a manager.
Part really well.
Yeah, he sure did. All right, you've referenced a couple of times how many television shows and how blessed you were to get all this wrestling. So, tell us a little bit about the television. How many shows were there?
when we were lucky, we had cable TV in the Toronto area in the early 70s. And we had, I'd say up to 1973, we had WWF out of New York. We had NWF out of Buffalo, which was the National Wrestling Federation, which was Pedro Martinez, Johnny Powers, and the Fargo brothers, and a lot of the Toronto stars. We had Frank Tunney. We had Vancouver TV, which was Gene Kiniski and Bob Brown, Domio Jonathan, Moose Morowski, those guys. This was every week, and then we off and on we would get Calgary, which was Stampede,
Right.
and then in about 72 or 73 we got Grand Prix Wrestling out of Montreal. So again, we've got Killer Kowalski, the Vachon brothers. We've got Andre the Giant. It was bizarre being yelled at by your mom to go outside and play when there was 4 or 5 hours of wrestling on in a row on a Saturday afternoon. And I think we would have probably had 4 hours on Saturday, and then on Sunday we had 2 hours of wrestling. And it that was right through the 70s. And sometimes they changed because Canon had TV, so one would drop and Canon, excuse me, would take its place. But I remember seeing highlights of Pedro Morales winning the belt from Ivan Koloff on TV. And oh gosh, my one of my favorite promotions was the National Wrestling Federation because I love the Fargo brothers, and that would have been Donnie and Johnny, who was Greg Valentine,
Yeah,
obviously.
right.
But I can't even imagine what it would have been like when someone says, "Oh my God, you had that much TV." We got to see a lot of wrestling and a lot of stars.
One name you haven't mentioned, and I don't know because I mean Canada is such a broad country, but since you got Vancouver, did you get the other side? Did you get the Cormiers? Did they run in television? And
Oh, they never came out that far. They ran in eastern Quebec, which was part of their territory was still part of Quebec and the Maritime provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI,
yeah,
and but yeah, it would have been nice because then we would have been able to see young J.J. Dillon and Johnny Weaver was up there in the 70s
right.
with a couple guys from the Mid-Atlantic, but and the Cormiers were fantastic. They ended up at the end of Maple Leaf Wrestling before it went to WWF. They were basically the tag team, the best high tag team in Toronto, and times were times were going tough, but they were still exciting and they were good, right?
Oh yeah,
Nothing wrong with the Cormiers.
yeah. Leo Burke was just a huge, massive guy who could work, and
Mhm.
it was just fabulous in that working big man type category. I think it was in some territories in the U.S. he was the Beast, but
His older brother was the Beast.
the older brother was the
Yeah,
Beast. Okay,
you might remember from your area,
and Terry Martin.
Tommy, Tommy Martin. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was Leo Burke.
yeah.
So
Tommy and Terry Martin. They worked in Kansas City. Jerry Oates was on the show, and they did a lot of tag matches with the Oates brothers and
nice.
Jerry Oates and Mike George. And I think that Jerry had a feud with Terry over the Central States title. But yeah, I mean, they were all great workers.
hmm And they had a huge feud in the early 70s in the Mid-Atlantic also with the Royal Kangaroos, which I remember from the magazines thinking, oh, this looks absolutely brutal. But the Mid-Atlantic at the time was a huge tag team area, and
Yeah,
you were
they
good. You got pushed there. You knew you were a star for sure.
yeah. From time to time, I'll go back to '65 and do some postings, and they were there even then. They were doing a lot of television tapings, and a couple of the Cormier brothers were there in '65. Sometimes one of them would be on one side and one would be on the other. But
Yeah.
yeah, they got over big with Mr. Crockett for sure.
they were good. I like them. I only seen them on on YouTube now, but yeah. But then you know what, Tony, we like you said about your time frame of when you grew up was your one of your favorite time of when you came to love wrestling, and uh, I I feel blessed because yes, I love the era I grew up in, but I mean because of the internet and YouTube kind of things, we get to see so much now that we just never even knew about. So it's so exciting to watch. uh, I'm enamored with Mid-Atlantic because of the stars, but
Yeah.
I watch so much Tennessee because there's so much out there. And the Memphis was so good. Oh my gosh. I never saw Lawler live. I never thought anything of Jerry Lawler actually ever until I started watching on YouTube, and he was so good.
He
Oh
really
my
was.
gosh.
He really was. I mean, we were blessed there. And then in the late 70s when Jarrett and Goulas split, then we had two promotions. And we always kind of did. The Tennessee territory was so big. We had the Eastern and the Western end, and Jerry Jarrett always booked the Western end, which eventually became what's now known as Memphis.
Mhm.
It was always based in Nashville. And even the both booking offices, when they split, were based in Nashville. But because the television was done in Memphis for Jerry's promotion, it kind of take on the Memphis promotion moniker. But I mean, every weekend we had like sort of a little bit like you. We didn't have as many shows as you did, but we saw television from Nashville. We saw television from Memphis. We saw television from Louisville, and they were all live and taped. And so the shows were all different with different combinations of this large roster of stars that was I mean, the best story I've ever heard about how big the Tennessee territory was is that a guy was talking about how he was in the territory with another wrestler and they didn't meet up for like a year. And he goes, "How long have you been here?" He goes, "Well, I've been here for a year." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, we just now ran into each other." I mean, that's
Wow.
how big the territory was, from Mississippi to Alabama to Missouri to Indiana to Kentucky to Tennessee. It was just a huge geographical area.
And it's hard to fathom if you don't know the um the actual physicality of the area.
Right.
I love maps, so I mean, there's not too many parts of the states that I don't recognize how big or small they are. And I haven't been to any of those states, but I've been completely down the eastern seaboard, and then, um, gosh, I again because none of my friends liked wrestling. All the traveling I did when I was younger in the states, I could have seen all sorts of wrestling live, but
Right.
I remember sitting in the car going, "Oh, oh, no, we gotta go get some beer. It's more important."
Yep. Well, listen, Wes, thanks for coming on tonight and educating us about Ontario history in 1975. I had a wonderful time. Tell everybody about your different Facebook groups, and in case they want to come by there and join up after listening to you talk about all your knowledge about Ontario history and the Wild Man and all that. So, what are the 4 or 5 groups you have to offer?
Well, thank you very much, Tony. It's been my pleasure coming on your show. I've watched some of your episodes, and it's nice that we've been able to make friends,
You bet.
and it's nice that we're working on keeping wrestling history alive, which is what drives me every day. I have 5 Facebook wrestling groups. One of them is for Ric Flair, which is it's just a nice to see some different perspective on the Nature Boy. I have one for British Columbia, which is a province in Canada, and that was where basically Gene Kiniski, Domio Jonathan, and those guys are all wrestled in the 70s.
Yeah.
And the most famous Al Tomko, who just just a tip for your listeners. If you get a chance, Google Al Tomko TV on YouTube. It's pretty brutal. Um, but so I have Ric Flair, British Columbia. I have Ontario page, history page. But that one now I think is 6 years old.
Wow.
So that would be just Google my name, Wes Maidment, or NWCA, which is a National Wrestling Clippings Association. That's our basically our over the top umbrella name, Ontario Wrestling History. We have the Wildman page, which is tribute to the Wildman, and then my main page is the National Wrestling Clippings Alliance group, and it has 2,500, 3,000 members. We cover, we try to cover the world, and I know it's impossible, but I have so much stuff to share. And with the internet, you can dig up anything. I just, before we went on the air, I dug up something on Victor Rivera just for the heck of it. So if I think of someone, I look for someone, and hey, guess what? I was thinking about Victor Rivera the other day. Here you go.
Yeah. Good. Well, listen, Wes Maidment, he's been our special guest tonight. We've been talking about Ontario wrestling history, particularly in 1975. We've covered everything from Maple Leaf Gardens to the Wild Man to UWA to all this stuff. And I hope you've enjoyed Wes being on our show and giving us this perspective on Canadian wrestling. Wes, thank you so much, and I hope you'll come back sometime. We'll do when we get later in the year and we talk about ending up 75 and going into 76. We'll have you back to do that. Okay.
Awesome. That'll be great, Tony. Thank you so much for having me on. I wish you all the best, and
Thank
all
you.
your listeners. I hope everything goes smooth with them. And it was all my pleasure coming and being on your show. Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed that visit with Wes Maidment, who is a wonderful wrestling historian. And you should check out some of those Facebook groups that he mentioned and go and join those, because he posts every single day in there, and he's got some amazing history, as you can tell by his visit today and some of the things he talked about and some of the things we showed you here on the show. He does a fantastic job. And now that he's going into retirement, he's going to have even more time to do even more history, which is good for all of us, because he's going to be documenting and finding more history about promotions and about things all across Canada. So Wes Maidment, he is a gift to the pro wrestling history space. Hey, if you like what we're doing here in the Time Tunnel podcast, you might want to visit my Substack channel, Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com. And when you go there, you're going to see a daily wrestling history newsletter. We're up into issue 1 in the 120s. I started this newsletter back in April of this year, 2025, and I put it out every single day. We do analysis on wrestling cards from the decades of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. We talk about the national expansion of the 80s. We talk about special events, special matches, things that happen on that day in pro wrestling history in every single issue. We talk about the birthdays of wrestlers that have passed on. We talk about the birthdays of wrestlers that are still active and or maybe retired, but they're still alive. And we also talk about the people who passed on. We call it the RIP salute for that day. And we list the wrestlers. And the thing I like to do is I want to find wrestlers and promoters and people that you may never have heard of or are kind of lost to time, that people don't talk about in everyday wrestling history talk. And I like to put those on there and remember them. Any wrestler debuts on that day in history, we list those. So that's the Daily Chronicle newsletter. It's called the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Daily Chronicle, and it's a pro wrestling history newsletter I put out every single day. And you can get that with a free subscription. All you have to do is put in your email address where you want me to send it, and I send it out about 4:30 a.m. Central every single morning for that day. Also, I have some paid content. So paid subscribers, if you want to subscribe for less than a cup of coffee, if you go to Starbucks and get some coffee, it's going to be somewhere around $5. And so if you put in $5 a month, which is $50 for an annual subscription. So we save you $10 a year if you do the annual, and you'll get the Daily Chronicle, and you'll also get, which you get for free, but then you'll also get my paid content, which is the research that I write, which may or may not fit in these books I'm working on, or that things that I just all of a sudden find interesting and I start writing about them. I just published an article about Whiskers Savage, who was maybe the biggest draw ever in the city of Houston, Texas. He was a Texas world champion back in the 30s. And so I just did an article on him. Not long ago, I did an article about the first masked man in Amarillo territory in Texas called the Masked Marvel. He wasn't the first Masked Marvel, but he was the first Masked Marvel in Amarillo. And he was booked all that summer. And that's where they first came up with the mask at stake match. And his mask was at stake several times that summer. And so those are the kinds of things that you'll get if you get a paid subscription. Right now, I'm releasing an article on Sam Mushnick's retirement as NWA president at the NWA convention in 1975. That was a very pivotal convention because Mushnick stepped down and they elected Fritz von Erich as president, and Jack Briscoe had given notice that he was ready to give up the world title, and the championship committee had to vote on a new world champion. And of course, we know that was Terry Funk, but I cover all of that in an article about the 1975 NWA convention. There's also an article coming out about Jack Briscoe's July NWA world title schedule. There's a article coming out about Jim Crockett Promotions' month of July 1985, which at the time is possibly the biggest revenue generating month they'd ever had in their company's history. A lot of that comes with a paid subscription. It's all at my Substack channel. Plus, you get this podcast for free, of course, also. So a free subscription or $5 a month or $50 a year gets you paid content there at Substack. Okay, let's get to the second guest on today's show, in the second half of our show. And the great Larry Laine is coming up now. And Larry is somebody that I got to know because I interviewed him for my Dory Funk Sr. book. He was broken in Amarillo by the Funks, and he also worked there a lot in the 70s. And Larry is just a fantastic guy. And he and his wife, Quinn, have both just been wonderful friends to me. And I wanted to have him here on the show and talk about his career, which at this point in 1975, 50 years ago, he was working for Stu Hart in Stampede Wrestling. And we're going to cover from January to July in Stampede Wrestling, 1975. Let's go to that right now. My conversation with Red Dog Larry Laine. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Personalities, Territories, Towns, and Buildings. I'm your host, Tony Richards, and today we are going to be talking about the career of one of pro wrestling's outstanding performers, Larry Laine, and we're going to be talking about 1975, and he was spending that year in Calgary, Alberta, Canada territory, and he's joining me live right now from Colorado. Hey, Larry, how you doing, man?
Well, I'm doing great, and even greater knowing that you're talking about what I used to be.
Well, you went around the world a couple of times, so we just want to go around it, just maybe around one country for you today. So how did you get in the wrestling business?
I was an amateur wrestler, starting out with junior high wrestling, 2 years, 4 years in high school wrestling, 4 years in college wrestling at Colorado State College, and then 2 years in the service, one year on All Army and 1 year on the All Service Wrestling team. And wrestling was always in my blood. And when I got out of that, I went back to coaching for a year and decided I wasn't through competing. And so I decided that I'd go into pro wrestling. So I went to Amarillo, Texas, and met up with the Funks and got my start and took off and had a 10-year career.
Who did you talk to there that kind of brought you into the business and got you going?
Well, I talked to Dory Funk Sr., and I went down in March since I was teaching school in Farmington, and talked to him about getting into pro wrestling, and he told me all about it and asked me if I was ready to start, and I said, no, I'd like to start in June after I finished my school year. Luck would have it, or bad luck would have it, on my way into Amarillo, he was on the way to the hospital, and he died that night with a heart attack.
Yeah, I had a chance. That's kind of how our relationship started, yours and mine. Is I had a chance to interview you for my Dory Senior book, and you think you might have even passed him on the highway, huh?
You know what? About the same time I was coming into Amarillo and Canyon, and he was on the way to the hospital. Yes, and
Man.
And then, of course, like I think I told you before, I thought, my gosh, this is my one chance and it's going to be blown. But I went to his funeral, and both Dory Jr. and Terry, if you just give us a couple of months to get everything organized, so we'll give you your try.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, you've been in the business a couple years by this time in 1975. How did you get hooked up working for Stu Hart?
Well, it's kind of amazing. I was wrestling in Amarillo, and a couple of Stu's sons came down, and they saw me wrestle and everything, and Terry was very supportive of me. And said, you know what, Larry, and we want you looking good, before you really get going great here. So we have a chance to go to Calgary. And so I went up to Calgary and met Stu and everything, and which was a good move. He gave me great opportunities up there.
You get started at the first part of the year in January in 75 with a guy that is not talked about a whole lot these days, but I really want to talk to you about him, a guy named John Quinn, who was also known as the Kentucky Butcher. And you were in a program with him in January. What memories do you have of John Quinn?
You know what? John Quinn was, to start off with, a very physical, impressive person. He was 6'5", 6'6", maybe 300 pounds. And if there was ever a real live Paul Bunyan, that would remind you. He was real hairy, too. He had a hairy chest and stuff. Very impressive person. Very good wrestler. And I wrestled him a lot and also had him as a tag partner quite a bit.
There's quite a few guys in Calgary at this time that kind of resemble this, but he had what a look for a heel. He really looked impressive and scary, You know
what? He was the epitome of what you should look like if you're a pro wrestler.
Yeah.
And also a good person. He was, I liked competing against him, and I liked competing with him. Yeah, he was one of the good ones. Also a good friend of mine.
They decide to put the title on you. So on January the 10th in Calgary at the Pavilion, you win the North American title from Quinn. Do you remember that at all?
Oh, yeah. You have, up in Calgary, we wrestle about 7 nights a week. So, had a lot of matches, and, a few stand out, and that's one of the standout matches.
The big title changes and the big things that happen more often than not took place on Friday night in Calgary. Who would have come to you and told you they were going to put the title on you?
Well, probably the booker, or probably Stu Hart.
Was Mark Lewin booking at that time?
Mark Lewin, I think maybe came later.
I see. Well, he's in a tag team with you here in January of 75. You guys are in a tag team, and you're booked against John Quinn and King Curtis Iaukea in some matches. Oh,
yeah, okay. Well, then, apparently he was there. Well, he was the booker. When he came in as the booker, and, of course, King Curtis came in as one of the top heels.
I was just going to say they traveled a lot. I think they had been in Australia together when they got there.
Yeah, came in, and he was the booker, and King Curtis was a very impressive, mean-looking heel. They did some pretty good business in the territory and stuff, and very good competitors, and also, good people. I got along with both of them fairly well.
So what was it like to work with King Curtis? That dude he's big, a big old Hawaiian, and bulky and all that. What was he like to work like in the ring?
Well, you know what? Believe it or not, we and I had almost exactly the opposite style of his and stuff. His was the main thing and whatever, and I was the wrestler type. But you know what? We had some good matches. Drew some pretty good crowds with him.
What was King Curtis like away from the ring, backstage?
You know what? Believe it or not, he was a good man, a good guy, and he was very, very receptive to me. For some reason, he liked me, even to the point that when he left the territory, he bought me a cowboy hat and gave it to me.
He loved horses, man. So he was probably in heaven there in Calgary with all the cattle and the horses and everything. He was a big horse guy.
Oh, yeah, and you know what? It's amazing. In the Calgary Stampede, he rode a horse in the Stampede, and I rode a horse in the Stampede.
Oh, man. You got any pictures of that?
Oh, yeah. Actually has. I don't know if I have King Curtis or not, but I've got him on my wall with me with an abdominal stretch on him.
Yeah,
and I have a picture of him.
I got that picture from Gwen. She sent me that.
Okay, great. And then I have a picture of myself on a horse in the Stampede.
Well, if she didn't send me that one, let's make sure she sends me that. I'd like to have that. So King Curtis goes over on you in February, like a month later after you won the title. So the title goes over to him for a heel run with the title in Calgary at the Victoria Pavilion. What were fans like in Calgary?
Well, I'll tell you what, they had King Curtis had the crowd going to the point that one time we got out of the ring and was fighting on the floor, and some little old lady grabbed both two handfuls of his hair and hung on. And I had to kind of rescue him from that. I had to tell her to turn him loose. I'll take care of him. 'Cause, man, she had two handful and she was pulling and it was tight. And he was.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Larry. Go ahead.
But yeah, she had two handful and it was tight, and he was actually kind of begging for help. So I told the old gal to turn him loose. I'll take care of him. And she finally did.
He was one of the best interviews in pro wrestling history. I mean, he could really work the microphone. But then and he was, he came across big, loud, and boisterous, but I saw him on an interview where he was just kind of being himself, and he was just a real pleasant, nice fella.
Oh, he was. Well, like I said, we got along good, had some very good matches and stuff, and he was everything that a heel should be. And we had good matches, and he was a good person outside of the ring.
And so here they bring in they just keep bringing in these guys that they work with just in all these different territories they go into. They work for a few weeks, then they bring in another guy that they work with and mix him in. And so the next guy they brought in to mix in was Mr. Hito. And they brought him in late February. Do you remember Mr. Hito at all?
Oh, I remember him well. We had a lot of matches, and again, he was a good person, but god dang, he was great to work with, even though he didn't know any English, to speak of. Mm-hmm. I mean, he knew a few words, but you couldn't converse with him. But yeah, Mr. Hito was a dandy, a very good heel.
So when you guys went in the ring, you just did it by feel, right?
Oh yeah. There was no communication at all other than physical,
Where did the television get done? Where did you guys do television at this time?
Okay, we did it at Calgary, and actually we had our big matches in Calgary, and we also had our interviews in the ring at the same time as the matches. So they had a segment in there where we did interviews.
So the television was just part of the house show every Friday night, huh?
Exactly, yeah. And Ed Whalen would go in the ring with him, and he was the ring announcer, and also he would interview you.
So the weekly travel schedule was Monday you were in Lethbridge, Tuesday you were in Red Deer, Wednesday was Saskatoon, Thursday was Regina, Friday was Calgary, and then once a month you'd hit Edmonton. Those are the main towns, and you had other towns you went to as well. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that Edmonton was not once a month; it was every week.
Oh, what day was that on?
That was on Saturday. So we had Calgary on Friday, and we had Edmonton on Saturday.
I see. Well, I'm glad you told me that, because it's just based on what the records we have, and we don't have records for everything, so it's hard to tell sometimes. Edmonton
was one of our big shows. I mean, it always drew a big crowd and stuff. And yeah, it was as big as Calgary probably.
What was it like traveling those towns every single day and every night? I mean, that you're covering a lot of ground there, aren't you?
Well, yeah, and 7 days a week. And the one thing that you didn't have is that usually on Sunday we had a spot show, so we pretty well wrestled 7 days a week. And I can honestly say there was one year if I had one day off in that year, I don't know when it was, and it was tough. And it was kind of funny that we go to Calgary. Well, we drove 500 miles from Regina to Calgary, and then we pretty well slept and wrestled Calgary. And the next night, we went just a short 200 miles to Edmonton. It was almost like a home event, only 200 miles. So,
I mean, you're covering some ground if you think 200 miles is a short trip, right?
Yeah, it was. It was almost a day off. We didn't have to leave until noon or sometime and get there, but it was good. And you learn to sleep. If you weren't riding in a car, you couldn't sleep. I mean, that's where we did all of our sleeping, was in the car when you were going from one town to the next. And if you had a short time to be at home, well, you took advantage of it.
I've heard guys talk about working that territory, and there were stories about all riding together. Did you guys all ride together in one vehicle, or?
Well, actually, all the baby faces rode in one van, and the heels in another. We didn't ride with our opponents.
And did you have to have the van, or did Stu have the van?
Well, Stu provided the van. Stu provided transportation in Calgary. That was a big thing.
What was Stu like?
Stu was a good guy, and you know what? And it's like I said, Stu really liked me, and he liked my amateur background, and we got along great, even to the point that he took me to a couple of houses that he thought was for sale. He wanted me to buy a house in Calgary and stay there. Yeah, I got along absolutely great with Stu.
What did he have in mind for you to do?
Well, just to wrestle and maybe book some of the time, So yeah, he liked me. I could have stayed there my whole time.
Yeah. And did you like it there? I mean, you obviously didn't think about it as far as staying, because you probably wanted to get back to Texas. But did you enjoy staying there for the time you were there?
You know what? I really enjoyed Calgary, even though it's like they said, you have 9 months of winter and 3 months of bad sledding up there. But and literally, I mean, it was cold. It was 60 below zero, and you had to have a snowmobile suit and boots and everything that you carried with you in the car in case you had breakdown or something. Very, very cold. It was unbelievable. But you adapted.
So in March of 75, you guys start working in 6-mans on top. And so on the heel side, it's John Quinn, King Curtis, and Mr. Hito. And then on your side, it's Mark Lewin and yourself and Dan Crawford. So tell me about Dan Crawford.
Now, Dan Crawford, and I'm just telling you like this, he was a wheeler dealer. I mean, he was a con expert. In fact, to the point where, and I don't know how you get these new people come into the territory, and he'd play cards with them, and he would always take all their money from them.
Oh.
And different things. But Dan was one of these guys that, he was a con artist. I knew it, and he knew that I knew it. But we got along great, and he was funny to me and very likable. I got along good with Dan.
He was the guy that sort of was in the first ladder match, I think, up there in Calgary.
Well, you know what? He was the one that, I guess, invented it or brought it about. Yeah, it was good, and it got over great.
So you do those 6-mans for a couple of weeks, and then you go to 8-man tags. And here's another guy they bring in that was with them in Australia, and he comes in on the heel side, Big Bad John. Remember anything about Big Bad John?
Yeah, but Big Bad John was pretty well just a manager of the guys, and he did the interviewing. Even though, like you said, King Curtis could do a heck of an interview, but Big John was the one that always interviewed, and he did a good job. He was great on the mic.
Then on your side of the 8-man, Stu comes in and works. Could Stu still work in 75?
Well, he could throw an uppercut. If you don't believe it, ask the guys he worked with.
I bet so.
Yeah, and well, like I said, Stu was good. I like those Stu.
I didn't want to go down in the dungeon with Stu any year, but I was just wondering what kind of shape he was in by 75.
Oh yeah, well he was. You know what? He was 62 and 75.
Yeah.
Because when I went up there in 73, he was 60, and he always liked to put his submission holds on people and then have them try to get out of it. And when I went on the mat with him, well, I knew what he was up to, so I always bailed myself out before he got to the pain point.
Yeah.
But he was a sadistic old guy, and he loved to hear people holler.
So these 8-man tag team matches, they were adding in a stipulation where you're going 3 out of 5 falls. Do you remember doing those?
I remember it a little bit, but that didn't last very long.
Right. It was just for the week or two that you had those 8-mans.
Yeah, and it was just kind of a extra bonus, or something different or whatever. Just another promotional thing that you could work with and try to make money with.
Yeah, and just make the matches a little bit different in the towns. Then in April, you get a new tag team partner coming in, Frankie Laine, and you guys are going after Hito and Quinn, who've got the international tag team championships. What'd you think of Frankie?
Well, Frankie was, he was a good wrestler. And I mean, he went hard all the time. It was go, 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 go. And good worker, typical wrestler. Didn't have, a lot of, he had good personality, but didn't have a whole lot of morals, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But he was fun. I got along good with him. And actually, the fact that, I had a good amateur background and stuff, I was kind of respected for that.
Yeah.
And so anytime I worked with them or worked as their partners, we got along pretty good.
Well, some people say he had the best chops in the business, and you were his partner, so you didn't have to take those. But you remember him giving those?
Well, somewhat, but I thought mine were better.
Well, they probably were. You were the lane that had the best chops then.
Oh yeah, exactly. And people always ask if we were brothers, but he had a Y in his last name.
Yes. So in May of 75, you get another tag team partner. I mean, they just keep switching your tag partners up. This is your third different tag team partner this year. Bill Cody teamed up with you in your program with Hito and Quinn for the tag belts. Have you ever met Cody before this?
I never met him, and you had something about he had 2 brothers that I never met at all.
Yeah, Bill and Lloyd.
Yeah, and I never met those. They were never in Calgary when I was. But yeah, Bill Cody was a good worker, and
you were only with him a week or two, and then toward the end of May, you ended up with Dan Crawford. And this goes back to your amateur background. It goes back to Stu liking amateur style and all that. But you had something called a training match. Was that an Olympic style amateur match or something?
Really what that was and why it got its name was that Dan Crawford was going to wrestle the world champion. And he needed somebody to give him a little extra boost and stuff. And so they put me against him, and which was kind of a compliment that, I felt like I could help him do better against the world champion.
Yeah. So actually, Briscoe came in there in July, on the 4th of July, I think is when they had their match. And also Hiro Matsuda was there, the world junior champion. So you had the world champion and the world junior champion on the same card there in Calgary.
Right. Yeah. And the world junior champion, it didn't really catch on real big. That was for people, I think, under 200 pounds or whatever. But
and Danny Hodge dominated that thing for so long.
Just like he dominated amateur wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there's a few guys mixed into things. I'll ask you about them one at a time. Jack Piesick. He was the son of Tiger Man John Piesick of Nebraska. Do you remember Jack?
I remember Jack a lot, and I like Jack. Now, he was older when he was up there, but he was a good worker, and he different things, and it was like, well, he was he was kind of I guess, an alcoholic at one time, and so when I knew him, he was really trying to stay off of the beer and stuff, and did good. But Jack was a fun person, and I mean, he was okay. And again, he was older when I was with him.
Yeah. Did he ever talk about his dad?
No, not too much, which is amazing because, you know, with all those miles of travel, you're always thinking of something to talk about, or you're either talking about old times or you're sleeping, you know.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're telling all your stories.
Right.
Keith Hart, he's one of Stu's sons, and this is his first full year in the wrestling business. Do you remember Keith?
Remember him? He was my best friend, and we traveled a lot together. And Keith was one good kid. I really liked him. He was my favorite outside of Stu, but he was my favorite Hart. And
what did you think he was going to turn out to be in the business at this time?
Well, you know, he wasn't real big, but he worked hard at it. And one thing I liked about him, that he even did some amateur wrestling and stuff, which I think really helped and really showed up good when you're wrestling, that you have the wrestling personification and stuff. And
was he able to do an interview?
Yeah, he could interview. He was okay.
I just don't remember ever seeing him very much, so I was just kind of curious about him.
Oh yeah, one time he was kind of a steady tag partner of mine. We went with him a lot, you know, when we wrestled the Kangaroos and the Kiwis and stuff. He was my tag partner a lot.
George Iaukea, now is this some relation to King Curtis? He also wrestled as Blackjack Slade.
And you know what? I've never heard of him. And then when I see the name Iaukea, well, you know, I always think of King Curtis, you know. But
yeah, he was. No,
I never met him.
He was in there tagging with King Curtis in some matches, so I was kind of curious.
And of course, I could have been back in Texas or some other territory at that time.
Yeah. June, you get another tag partner, and this is the guy you started out wrestling at the beginning of the year, and who we started talking about at the beginning of the show, John Quinn. You guys are tagging up. Did they turn John babyface then?
Oh yeah, and he was a good enough performer that he could go either babyface or heel, and you get a tough heel team in there. Well, you know, they'll accept almost anybody, yeah. And then the crowd even, like, sometimes automatically they will switch. The crowd will switch you. And all of a sudden, instead of booing you, well, they start cheering for you.
So the Funks thought it was a good idea for you to come up here. You've been here 6 months. Next time when we come back, we'll do the second half of 75. But I'm just curious, did you talk to them while you were up there? Did they ask how it was going? Did you give them an update or anything like that?
Well, you know, not too much, but actually even Dory and I went up together. When I was in Amarillo, we would go up to Calgary and wrestle. And even Terry and I went up and wrestled together in Calgary. We kind of kept in touch, but not a lot.
What's your favorite memory of being in Calgary, Alberta at this time?
Well, again, the crowds were good. Stu Hart really liked me, and he took good care of me. And of course, Keith was a very good friend of mine, and we traveled a lot together. And basically, it's just having good matches. And I had the Stomper was a very good partner, and I had a lot of hour matches with him and stuff. And Archie Goldie, and we had a lot of good matches, and that got over good. And then he helped me a lot. I mean, that, going in hour matches, probably when I hadn't been in the business more than 3 months, we were going hour matches. So that was a very good time,
He might be the best wrestler to ever come from there, huh? Archie Goldie.
Well, I thought I was.
Well, you're not from there, though. You from Texas.
Yeah, well, you're true. Yeah. Yeah, Archie was great. He a very good heel, a very good interview too.
Yeah,
he could interview. And he got into his interviews.
I was just going to say that was so amazing in the second half of his career is he never talked. he always had a manager. But in the first part of his career, he was a great interview.
Well, yeah, I mean that was one of his strong points. Very physical looking person, and like I said, had the great interview that heck he could bring the crowd down just with talking.
What was your favorite town to go to?
Well, actually, Calgary was great. I mean, that was one. Edmonton was good. Saskatoon and Regina, they were good. Regina was very good. I was accepted very well at Regina, and that's where they took a lot of pictures and stuff of us.
So it sounds like the second half of the week was better than the first half.
Oh yeah, and that's true. And then of course, some towns they draw good, and Calgary and Edmonton all drew good. And even though you try to give the same kind of a match, when you're wrestling before hundreds or before thousands, And
so of the guys we named and talked about, were there guys that were over in some of the other towns?
Well,
that was
actually,
kind of their town.
Yeah, I can't think of anything right off, but no, really, whatever they promote, they promote the main events, of course, and that goes all the way around. They get the same television. So
Right.
Actually, it's basically the same. So if you're over in Calgary, you're probably over in Edmonton, you're over in the rest of the towns.
Well, man, I tell you what, I love this visit, and I appreciate you sharing all your memories for the first part of 75. I'm just glad I stirred up your brain a little bit and got some of these things loosened up some.
What do you think? My wife will be able to stand me now?
Yeah, she will. Yeah, she will.
Because I used to always tell her how great I was, and she never really believed me.
Well, it's the wrestling business. You're not quite sure what's real and what's not,
But you know what? And be real honest, I really appreciate you calling me and bringing back those good memories and stuff. And yeah, that was good. Even like Keith Hart sent me some tapes and stuff back when, and we kind of keep up with things that way. And yeah, that was a good time in my life. And be real honest with you, even though I taught school for 25 years and 22 years after I wrestled, I still like to be known as the professional wrestler,
Red Dog Lane.
And Red Dog Lane and that type of thing. And actually I'm called Red Dog a lot. And guess what my license plates say?
Red Dog?
Yeah, Red Dog. So yeah, I really enjoyed that time.
How'd you get that name, Larry?
Well, you know what? I was going to North Carolina, and actually Terry Funk's the one that he wanted me to have a unique name, and so a unique name and a unique place. So I went to North Carolina as Red Dog Lane from Muleshoe, Texas.
Muleshoe.
Yeah, and there is a place called Muleshoe.
That's amazing.
And that got a lot of heat, just the name.
Sure.
So, yeah, that was it. Terry was a good innovator in wrestling and stuff, and it got over good in North Carolina.
He could come up with some stuff now. He sure could.
Well, he was a dandy, and he was a good person. He felt for the kids and everything, and of course, like I said, the only thing you have going for you in pro wrestling is how much money you make wrestling. You have no benefits at all. And so you better save your money and try to do good and put some back and keep going.
For the different places that, I've got another question before I let you go, but you said Stu took care of you, and I just sort of took that as he took care of you in pay. Compared to the different territories you worked, how did Calgary rank?
Well, Amarillo was my favorite. Of course, with the Funks and everything, and that was, at that time, was home. And like I said, I like Calgary, and anytime Stu wanted to boost up his program or whatever, he would call me, and he would pay my transfer up to Calgary. Yeah, Calgary was good.
Well, listen, I'm going to let you have some time here to let your brain rest, but in a few weeks, I'm going to send you another list and get it cranked up again. So
you know what? Anytime you want to talk about it, nothing I like better than talking about myself.
well, listen, I appreciate you, man. I really do. And I appreciate our friendship, and I thank you for taking some time to share some 50-year-ago career highlights with me today, okay?
Well, so much so that if you're ever in Redville, be sure to look me up.
I'm going to become there just because you said that. I'm going to show up.
Okay. Well, that sounds great, Tony. It's always great talking to you, and you're so much fun to interview with.
Thank you.
You ask
man.
the right questions, and you give me the right responses and stuff, and you make it real easy.
I just got to remember when you asked me that you're the greatest I ever saw.
Okay. Or the greatest you never did see.
All right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Oh, there you go. All right. I'll get it right. You just keep working with me. I'll get it.
All right. Well, I like to work with people who are interested in such a thing. And, well, like I said, pro wrestling was a huge part of my life.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that visit with Larry Laine. What a character. Still the same guy. He likes to rib me, and I liked being ribbed by Larry. He's a fantastic guy. I enjoy our conversations, and that gives you a little bit of a glimpse. You know, as I do these shows, what I want is I want you, the viewer and the listener, to feel like you're having lunch or coffee with me and the person I'm visiting with, and you get to sit in and listen in as a third party, just listening to the conversation. And Larry is just such a great guy, and that just gives you a little bit of an insight into what our conversations sound like when we're talking on the phone with each other. Larry Laine, what a great guy. So if you come to my Substack channel, which is Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com, you'll get an update on everything that I'm doing. There's a tab there called Current Projects. And in the Current Projects tab, it'll tell you who's coming up on the podcast, who I am planning to be interviewing and talking to and getting on the show. You'll also get an update on the books that I'm writing. So I'm writing a book about Dory Funk Sr., the life and times of Dory Funk Sr., the king of the Texas Death Match. And I've just started in July, started writing the book. I've been researching it since 2024. And so now I just about have all my research put together. I've talked to at least 100 people about him and about who've either worked in the territory, they are family members, they were good friends, they are business people in Amarillo at the time that Dory Sr. was around, and they had interactions with him. And so that book is in the writing stages now. And so I'm writing that. I'm also working on a book on the life and career of Jim Barnett, the wizard of pro wrestling. And so my research on Jim started last year also, and really I had to do a whole lot of research. I had to speed up. I put the Funk book on hold for about 6 weeks, and I really just intently focused on gathering research on Jim Barnett for the Briscoe and Bradshaw shows that we did. And so that book is going to come a little faster than the Funk book because I went so much faster and got so much Barnett information in such a short amount of time. So I'm working on that. There are about, altogether, I would say there are 8 books I want to write, and 6 of them for sure. 2 of them we'll see how it goes, how long it takes to get these others done. But I'll tell you more about that in the weeks, months, and years ahead. You can also check out the things there that we have, the Daily Chronicle I told you about, the paid content, and those kinds of things. I'll come over and join our Facebook group. It's called the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. We have posts in there every single day. Also, you can follow me on X. I'm Tony Richards 4, at Tony Richards 4, right? I do a lot of posting, do a lot of interacting with people. We have great conversations on X about pro wrestling history. There are a lot of great historians and a lot of pro wrestling history enthusiasts on there. And we just have a great time on X, at Tony Richards 4. Next week here on the show, listen to this. My good friend and popular guest, Jerry Oates, will be back to do more on his time in 1975 in the Central States, Kansas City territory. So Jerry's coming back for the second time. We're going to move on into more of 75. It's another great interaction and conversation. And then my second guest on the show, for the first time, he's going to be making his debut here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. We're going to have Mike George here. And Mike was the tag team partner of Jerry in Kansas City. They held the NWA World Tag Team Championships there in the Central States version. And we're going to take Mike's career for the first half of 75 from January to July when he was in Kansas City, and we're going to walk through that. Mike's got some great stories to tell. I can't wait for you to hear some of them. In July, as July wrapped up, he went to Florida. And so we'll have him back in a few weeks to come back and do the second half of 75 and his time in the Florida territory. But that's who's coming up next week. Jerry Oates, we're talking about Kansas City, and Mike George, and we're talking about Kansas City, all next week here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. I appreciate you. I appreciate you being a pro wrestling history enthusiast, and I want you to know how much I appreciate your investment of time in our show today and in our show every single week. I hope you will like it. I hope you'll subscribe and get it. I hope you will share it with your family and your friends. And until next time and next week, we'll have another great show for you. This is Tony Richards saying bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. Tune in for another great episode next week, interviewing wrestlers, referees, and media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. We'll release a new episode soon. Don't you dare miss it.